May 4th, 1943, 400 miles west of the Azores. Kapitan-Leutnant Heinrich Müller gripped the periscope handles of U-boat 531 as dawn broke over the Atlantic, transforming the endless grey waves into ribbons of copper and gold. For 2 years these depths had been sanctuary. The ocean had hidden his boat and 49 others that prowled these hunting grounds, invisible wolves among defenceless sheep. On this morning, scanning the empty horizon for the smoke of Allied convoys, Miller felt the confidence of a predator who owned his domain. The war had been good to the U-boat service. Since 1941, German submarines had sent over 8 million tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. Merchant sailors called the Eastern American seaboard Torpedo Junction. The British Admiralty privately estimated they were 6 months from losing the Battle of the Atlantic entirely. Miller himself had sunk 11 ships totaling 63,000 tons. His Knight's Cross sat in his pocket, awarded just 3 weeks earlier in Lorient. At 29 years old, he was among the elite of Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz's force, the youngest men in the Kriegsmarine and the deadliest. But something was changing in the spring of 1943, something the U-boat commanders couldn't quite identify. Ships they should have sunk were escaping, convoys they should have found remained invisible, and increasingly the hunters were becoming the hunted. Miller didn't know it yet, but his boat was being watched, not by lookouts with binoculars scanning from pitching destroyer decks, not by patrol aircraft limited by human eyesight and good weather. He was being observed by a technology so revolutionary that it had transformed the Battle of the Atlantic in a matter of months. A machine that could see in total darkness, through clouds, through fog, through weather that grounded all aircraft. A device that made the ocean's protective concealment as obsolete as wooden sailing ships. The centimetric radar, operating at 10 centimeters wavelength on the microwave spectrum, had arrived. And U-boat commanders like Heinrich Müller were about to discover that the ocean no longer hid them. The realization would come in fire and explosions and sudden death from the sky. It would come in the terrible mathematics of loss rates that climbed from acceptable to catastrophic in mere weeks. It would come in the desperate radio transmissions from boats that simply vanished. Their final messages describing aircraft appearing from nowhere, attacking before defensive action was possible. This is the story of how physics defeated seamanship. How a device the size of a suitcase ended Germany's greatest strategic advantage. How British and American scientists won the Atlantic not with more ships or more depth charges, but with electromagnetic radiation operating at frequencies the Germans couldn't detect until it was too late. It's the story of May 1943, when the German Navy called back its U-boats in admission of defeat, when Dönitz himself acknowledged that continuing the campaign meant certain death for his crews, when the ocean, which had hidden submarines since their invention, became a killing field illuminated by invisible light. The Type 7 U-boat, the weapon that nearly strangled Britain, was a masterpiece of German engineering. 220 feet long, displacing 770 tons surfaced, crewed by 44 men who lived in conditions that would horrify a modern sailor. The interior of a U-boat was a mechanical hell. Every surface dripped with condensation. The air reeked of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and the chemical toilets that could only be flushed under specific conditions. Mould grew on bread within days. Men slept between torpedo racks, in hammocks strung over machinery, anywhere a body could fit in the cramped steel tube. But this machine could stay at sea for 12 weeks, diving to 750 feet, travelling 6,500 miles before needing to refuel. Its 4 bow torpedo tubes and single stern tube carried 14 torpedoes, each capable of breaking a freighter's back. The electric motors, silent and deadly, could propel the boat underwater at 7 knots for 80 miles, before the batteries demanded recharging. On the surface, twin diesel engines pushed it to 17 knots, fast enough to outrun most escort vessels. More importantly, fast enough to position ahead of convoys, diving only for the attack itself. This was the key to U-boat tactics. The submarine spent most of its time on the surface, using its low profile and the ocean's vastness as concealment. A U-boat's conning tower stood only 15 feet above the waterline. At any range beyond 5 miles, it was invisible to lookouts, a grey shadow lost among grey waves. The Atlantic is 41 million square miles. Finding a submarine in that vastness without knowing where to look was mathematically impossible. The Wolfpack tactics developed by Dönitz exploited this invisibility brilliantly. Multiple U-boats spread across probable convoy routes maintained radio watch. When one boat spotted a convoy, it didn't attack immediately. It shadowed, staying at extreme visual range, reporting position and course to headquarters in France. Dönitz's operations staff would vector other boats to intercept points, creating a concentration of submarines ahead of the convoy's path. Then, at night, the attacks would begin. Surfaced U-boats running on diesel engines would penetrate the escort screen. Their low profiles made them almost impossible to see in darkness. They would fire torpedoes from inside the convoy columns, often at ranges under 1,000 yards, then race away on the surface, reloading as they went. The British called these attacks the killing time. In a single night, a convoy could lose 10 or 15 ships. The escorts, blind in the darkness, racing between explosions, dropping depth charges on sonar contacts that usually weren't there. The U-boats, undetectable on the surface, manoeuvring freely, selecting targets at leisure. It was slaughter. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships. The construction programs couldn't keep pace. Every month, more tonnage went down than was launched. Churchill later wrote that the U-boat peril was the only thing that ever really frightened him during the entire war. But the Wolfpack tactic had a vulnerability the Germans didn't recognize. It required surface submarines to shadow convoys. It required radio transmissions to coordinate attacks. It required U-boats to spend 90% of their time on the surface, diving only when attacking or evading. The tactic assumed that a surface submarine in the vast Atlantic remained invisible. That assumption was about to be catastrophically disproved. The story of centimetric radar begins not with military necessity but with pure physics. In February 1940, two British scientists, John Randall and Harry Boot, working in a laboratory at the University of Birmingham, were trying to solve a seemingly abstract problem. Existing radar systems operated at wavelengths of 1.5 meters, which was adequate for detecting large objects like ships or aircraft at long range. But the long wavelength meant large antennas and poor resolution. You could tell something was out there, but not what it was or exactly where. Shorter wavelengths would provide much better resolution and allow smaller antennas. The problem was generating sufficient power at centimetric wavelengths. Existing vacuum tube technology couldn't do it. Randall and Boot were experimenting with a device called a cavity magnetron, a resonant cavity surrounded by a magnetic field that could theoretically generate microwave radiation. On February 21, 1940, they tested a prototype. It generated 400 watts of continuous power at 9.8 centimeters wavelength, roughly 1,000 times more powerful than any previous microwave source. The cavity magnetron was immediately classified at the highest level. The British government understood they had stumbled on something revolutionary. A radar operating at 10 centimeter wavelength could be small enough to fit in an aircraft. It could detect objects with precision impossible at longer wavelengths. It could see through weather that blinded optical systems. Most importantly for the Battle of the Atlantic, it could detect a submarine's conning tower at several miles range, even in total darkness. But Britain in 1940 lacked the industrial capacity to mass-produce the device. They were fighting for survival. Their factories focused on fighters and bombers and tanks. So in September 1940, a British technical mission arrived in the United States carrying, among other technological secrets, a cavity magnetron. The Tizard mission, named for its leader Sir Henry Tizard, was one of the most important technology transfers in history. American scientists examining the magnetron understood immediately. Dr. Edward Bowles of MIT called it the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, established specifically to develop microwave radar, began work in November 1940. Within 18 months, they had created practical airborne systems. The British did likewise. By early 1943, centimetric radar was being installed in patrol aircraft on both sides of the Atlantic. The Germans knew the Allies had radar. Their own METOX receivers could detect the 1.5 meter wavelength radar used by patrol aircraft in 1941 and 1942. When a METOX receiver detected radar emissions, the U-boat would crash dive, hiding underwater until the threat passed. It was an effective countermeasure, but the METOX receivers couldn't detect centimetric radar. The frequency was too high. The receivers, designed for meter wavelength radiation, were deaf to the microwave spectrum. A U-boat could be illuminated by 10-centimeter radar, and its crew would have no warning whatsoever until the attack began. Kapitan Lieutenant Peter Creamer, commanding U-333, encountered the new radar on March 17, 1943, in the mid-Atlantic. His boat was surfacing after a submerged approach to convoy HX-229. Standard procedure: stay deep during daylight, surface at dusk to attack at night. The boat broke surface at 20:15 hours, the conning tower watch climbing up to scan for escorts before fully surfacing. The sky was overcast, visibility perhaps 2 miles in the gathering darkness. Perfect conditions for a surface attack. Creamer was still in the control room when the lookout's scream came down the voice pipe. "Aircraft, 2,000 meters, attacking!" There was no time. No time to dive, no time to man the anti-aircraft guns, no time for anything except to watch death arrive. A British Liberator bomber, flying at 200 feet, appeared from the overcast. Its landing lights snapped on, illuminating U-333 like a stage. 4 depth charges fell in a perfect straddle. The explosions lifted the stern clear of the water, shattering lights, throwing men against bulkheads. The dive alarm was screaming, men were scrambling down the tower, the aircraft was circling for another run. By some miracle, the pressure hull held. Creamer got the boat under, levelled off at 200 feet, and began evasive manoeuvres. Behind him, destroyers summoned by the aircraft were racing in. They would hunt him for 6 hours, dropping 47 depth charges before he finally escaped into deep water. U-333 made it home, but just barely. Creamer's report to headquarters was baffled. The aircraft appeared without warning, no radar detection. Our METOX receiver showed nothing. Visibility was poor, yet they found us immediately. They are detecting us by some means we cannot identify. Similar reports were flooding into Dönitz's headquarters from across the Atlantic. U-boats were being attacked without warning. Aircraft were appearing from nowhere, even in weather that should have grounded all patrol activity. The loss rate, which had been acceptable, was climbing. In March 1943, 15 U-boats were lost. In April, 16. The crew training program couldn't keep pace. Worse, experienced commanders, veterans of 5 or 6 patrols, were dying, their knowledge and expertise going down with them. Dönitz and his staff analysed every report, searching for patterns. Some commanders suggested the Allies had developed an infrared detector that could see the heat from the boat's diesel exhaust. This theory was debunked when boats with cold engines were also attacked. Others proposed that the Allies were using psychics, somehow sensing U-boat positions through supernatural means. Desperate times generated desperate theories. One commander insisted the British had trained seagulls to follow submarines. The correct answer, that the Allies had developed a new radar operating at wavelengths German technology couldn't detect, was considered but seemed unlikely. German scientists had examined captured Allied aircraft and found no evidence of new radar systems. What they had found, and misidentified, were the antennas for the centimetric systems. These were so small, a simple dish less than 30 inches in diameter, that German intelligence assumed they were navigational equipment. The idea that such a small antenna could be a high-powered radar seemed impossible, given German understanding of the technology. By May 1943, the mystery didn't matter. The losses did. That month would become known as Black May in the U-boat service. In those 31 days, 41 U-boats would be destroyed. Not damaged, not forced to abort, destroyed. Killed with their entire crews, 2,000 men erased from existence. The loss rate was 30%. No military force can sustain 30% monthly losses. The mathematics are simple and brutal. At that rate, the entire U-boat force would be destroyed in 4 months. The breaking point came on May 24, 1943. That day, 5 U-boats were destroyed in the North Atlantic, all by aircraft equipped with centimetric radar. Dönitz, reading the loss reports in his headquarters bunker in Berlin, made the most difficult decision of his command. He ordered all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic immediately. The campaign was over. Germany had lost. But to understand why the new radar was so devastatingly effective, we need to understand exactly how it worked and what it revealed. The ASV Mark III radar, the primary British airborne system, transmitted pulses of microwave radiation from a rotating antenna mounted in a streamlined housing under the aircraft's nose. Each pulse lasted 1 microsecond. Between pulses, the system listened for echoes. When the transmitted energy struck an object, some of it reflected back, The time delay between transmission and echo reception revealed the target's range. The direction the antenna was pointing revealed its bearing. At 10 centimeter wavelength, the radar beam was remarkably narrow, less than 10 degrees wide. This meant the system could discriminate between objects only yards apart. More importantly, it could detect small objects. The 1.5 meter wavelength radar couldn't reliably detect a submarine's conning tower. The echo was too weak against the radar, clutter from the sea surface. But 10 centimeter radar could detect that conning tower from 12 miles away in calm seas, 6 miles in rough weather. The system provided the navigator with a cathode ray tube display showing echoes as bright blips against a dark background. Range rings marked distance. The navigator could watch a contact, determine its speed and course, guide the pilot to an intercept. The entire process, from detection to attack, could take as little as 3 minutes. A U-boat's crash dive procedure required 30 seconds to get the conning tower hatch sealed and begin submerging, another 30 seconds to get below the surface, and 2 full minutes to reach safe depth. Do the math. The aircraft arrived before the U-boat could escape, but even more deadly than detection was what the radar enabled tactically. Before centimetric radar, patrol aircraft hunted U-boats by sight, which meant they needed good visibility in daylight. Night attacks were rare and usually lucky accidents. Aircraft would patrol assigned sectors, the crew scanning endlessly, hoping to spot a shadow on the water. The vast majority of patrol flights saw nothing. The ocean was too big, the submarines too small, the visibility too limited. Centimetric radar changed everything. Patrol aircraft could hunt at night, in fog, in weather that would have grounded them before. They could detect submarines at ranges that allowed perfect attack geometry. And they could find submarines even when the U-boat commanders thought they were safely invisible. A British Coastal Command analysis from June 1943 showed the numbers. In 1942, before centimetric radar, patrol aircraft sighted U-boats on 2% of patrols. In May 1943, with the new radar, the sighting rate jumped to 18%, a 9-fold increase. More importantly, of U-boats detected by centimetric radar, 47% were successfully attacked before they could dive. In 1942, that number had been 8%. Korvettenkapitän Hans Troyer, commanding U-221, survived 3 separate radar-directed attacks in April 1943. His patrol report, stamped with the highest classification when it reached headquarters, described the terror of an enemy who could see in the dark. April 9th, 0230 hours, surface to charge batteries. Clear night. Excellent visibility, sea state 3. After 20 minutes, lookout sighted aircraft at 1,000 meters, already attacking. Crash dived. 4 depth charges exploded during dive, heavy damage to stern. Leveled off at 180 meters, began repairs. April 13th, 2045 hours, surface to charge batteries. Overcast, visibility less than 500 meters, heavy rain. Felt safe due to weather. After 12 minutes, aircraft appeared from clouds, landing lights on, attacking immediately. Crash dived, 6 depth charges, all near misses. Diving planes jammed. Took 8 hours to repair. April 17th, 0:15 hours, surface to charge batteries. Completely dark, fog, visibility under 200 meters. Impossible for aircraft to operate, or so we thought. After 18 minutes, aircraft attacked from astern, its first indication being bomb explosions. Did not crash dive, boat too damaged for deep diving. Fought surface engagement with anti-aircraft guns. Aircraft made 3 runs, 2 wounded in conning tower. Finally drove it off. Troja's conclusion was stark. We are being detected by a means we cannot counter. The enemy can find us in any weather, day or night. Surfacing is now suicide. But we must surface to charge batteries, to make speed, to reach the convoy routes. We are trapped between the necessity to surface and the certainty of death when we do. The terrible dilemma Troja identified was fundamental to submarine operations. A submerged U-boat running on electric motors had extremely limited range and speed. The battery capacity was sufficient for perhaps 80 miles at 4 knots before exhausted. To charge those batteries required running the diesel engines, which required surfacing. To reach patrol areas required sustained high-speed transit, which meant running surfaced on diesels for days or weeks. To shadow a convoy required surface speed. To escape after an attack required surface speed. Every critical U-boat function except the actual torpedo attack required surfacing. centimetric radar had made surfacing deadly. Dunitz's staff calculated that by May 1943, a U-boat in the North Atlantic convoy routes could expect to surface perhaps 40 times during a patrol for battery charging and transit. Each time, it was vulnerable to radar detection. The probability of being detected at least once during the patrol approached certainty. Once detected, the probability of destruction was 50%. The entire operational model was broken. The Germans tried countermeasures. In July 1943, U-boats began deploying to sea with massively increased anti-aircraft armament. The thinking was simple: if we can't hide, we'll fight. The standard U-boat carried a single 20mm anti-aircraft gun on the conning tower, adequate for driving off reconnaissance aircraft but useless against a determined attacker. The new configuration added two twin 20mm mounts and occasionally a 37mm gun. Some boats looked like floating anti-aircraft batteries, their conning towers crowded with weapons and gunners. Oberleutnant Horst von Schroeter, commanding U-1667, deployed with the new armament in August 1943, convinced the additional firepower would level the battlefield. His patrol lasted 11 days. On August 23rd, southwest of Iceland, his boat was detected by a British Halifax bomber while surfaced in broad daylight. Von Schroeter, following his orders, decided to fight rather than dive. It was a massacre. The Halifax attacked from astern, where the U-boat's guns couldn't bear until too late. Its 8 machine guns and 4 depth charges killed 9 men on the conning tower, destroyed all anti-aircraft guns and blew a hole in the pressure hull. U-667 sank in 3 minutes. Von Schroeter and 13 men survived. 39 died. The survivors, picked up by a destroyer, were interrogated. Von Schroeter's statement to British intelligence revealed the desperation. We were told the new guns would protect us, that we could fight aircraft on equal terms. It was a lie. The aircraft has speed, maneuverability, armour, overwhelming firepower. We have none of those things. We have only the hope of diving before they arrive. And your radar makes that impossible. You see us before we see you. The battle is over before it begins. In September 1943, the Germans deployed the Naxos radar detector, designed to detect centimetric radar emissions. It should have been their salvation. In practice, it was nearly useless. The Naxos receiver could detect 10cm radar, but only at close range, typically under 6 miles. The patrol aircraft could detect the U-boat from 12 miles. By the time the Naxos warning sounded, the aircraft was already inbound. There wasn't enough time to dive. Some boats tried surfacing only at night, diving at the first Naxos warning, but the battery drain from limited surface time meant they couldn't reach patrol areas or maintain station. Other boats tried remaining surfaced regardless of Naxos warnings, fighting every aircraft engagement. Their loss rate was catastrophic. Fregattenkapitän Rolf Mutzelberg, one of Germany's most successful commanders with 70,000 tons sunk, tried a different approach. In October 1943, commanding U-203, he attempted to transit the Bay of Biscay, the heavily patrolled waters between France and the Atlantic, entirely submerged. The boat would remain underwater continuously for 4 days, using the electric motors at minimum speed, surfacing only briefly after dark to snorkel, a device that allowed air intake while the boat remained at periscope depth. It almost worked. On the 4th day, 80 miles from deep water, U-203 had no choice but to fully surface for battery charging. The batteries were completely exhausted. The boat was surfaced for 7 minutes before a British Wellington bomber appeared. The aircraft attacked immediately with rockets, a new weapon the Germans weren't prepared for. 6 60-pound rockets struck U-203, 3 hitting the pressure hull. The boat sank in less than a minute. There were no survivors. The snorkel, borrowed from Dutch submarine designs, became the only effective countermeasure to centimetric radar. It allowed U-boats to run their diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth, invisible to radar. But the snorkel had severe limitations. Maximum speed was 6 knots, barely faster than a surface convoy. The device was vulnerable to mechanical failure. Most critically, it created a small wake and left diesel exhaust on the surface, both visible to aircraft in daylight. Snorkel-equipped boats still needed to fully surface periodically for maintenance, battery checks and fresh air circulation. The snorkel reduced vulnerability but didn't eliminate it. By late 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively over. U-boats continued to deploy, continued to attack, continued to sink ships, but the exchange rate had reversed completely. For every Allied ship sunk, more than one U-boat was destroyed. New construction couldn't keep pace with losses. Experienced crews were gone, replaced by novices trained in weeks rather than months. The technological advantage had shifted decisively to the Allies, and the cause was centimetric radar combined with other advances. Escort carriers providing air cover in mid-ocean, improved sonar, more escorts, better tactics. But the radar was the key. It removed the ocean's protective concealment, exposing the U-boats to attacks they couldn't evade. The statistical story tells everything. In March 1943, U-boats sank 627,000 tons of Allied shipping, while losing 15 boats. In May, they sank 299,000 tons while losing 41 boats. In December 1943, they sank 162,000 tons and lost 13 boats. In June 1944, they sank 56,000 tons and lost 25 boats. The trend was unmistakable and irreversible. German submarine production peaked at 30 boats per month. But monthly losses exceeded 20. The force was shrinking even as Allied shipping expanded. Dönitz, promoted to command the entire Kriegsmarine in January 1943, refused to abandon the U-boat campaign despite the losses. His reasoning combined military logic with political calculation. The U-boats tied down enormous Allied resources in escort vessels, patrol aircraft, and infrastructure. Even a diminished submarine threat forced the Allies to maintain massive convoy systems. More importantly, abandoning the Atlantic would free those resources for offensive operations against Germany. Better to die fighting than surrender the sea without resistance. But for the men who crewed the U-boats, the mathematics was simple and terrible. In 1943, 237 U-boats were lost. In 1944, 242. Total U-boat personnel casualties from 1943 through war's end exceeded 30,000 dead, 3/4 of all U-boat crew who deployed. The service went from being an elite posting sought after by the best sailors to a death sentence served by teenagers with minimal training. In early 1942, the average U-boat crewman had a 50% chance of surviving the war. By late 1943, survival probability had dropped to 25%. By 1945, under 10%. Kapitänleutnant Peter Kremer, who survived U-333's encounter with centimetric radar in March 1943 and went on to command 2 more boats, described the psychological transformation in his post-war memoir. Before the new radar, we felt like hunters. Dangerous work, certainly, but we had advantages. We could hide in the ocean's vastness. We could choose when to surface and when to dive. We controlled our exposure to danger. After the radar, we became prey, hunted constantly by an enemy who could see us when we couldn't see them. Every time we surfaced, every time we ran on diesels to charge batteries, we knew aircraft might already be inbound. The ocean no longer hid us. We were naked on the surface, exposed and vulnerable. The psychological strain was devastating. Men cracked, refused to surface, froze during crash dives. Some boats returned to port with crews on the edge of mutiny. The breaking point for many commanders came not from enemy action, but from finding themselves unable to execute their mission. Oberleutnant Hans Stock, commanding U-659, deployed in November 1943 with orders to patrol the convoy routes southwest of Iceland. His patrol log, captured when the boat was scuttled in April 1945, recorded the frustration. November 18th, detected convoy by hydrophone, range approximately 20 nautical miles. Attempted to close surfaced at maximum speed. After 40 minutes, detected radar emissions on Naxos. Crash dived. November the 19th, regained contact with convoy. Attempted surface approach. After 25 minutes, Naxos warning. Crash dived. Batteries now at 40%. November 20th, contact lost. Batteries at 20% must charge. Surfaced 200 hours. After 8 minutes, Naxos warning. Dived on minimal battery charge. November 21st, batteries exhausted. Must surface regardless of risk. Surfaced 230 hours for emergency charge. Aircraft attacked after 15 minutes. Heavy damage, 3 wounded, diving planes jammed. Remained surfaced, fought off 2 more attacks. November 22nd, continuing surface for repairs and charging. 6 separate radar contacts. Evaded by stopping engines and letting boat drift while aircraft searched. Finally completed battery charge. November 23rd attempted to regain convoy contact. Surfaced running produced immediate radar warning. This continued for 3 days. Every attempt to surface brought aircraft. Submerged speed insufficient to reach convoy routes. Mission impossible to execute. Stock's boat eventually returned to port, having never fired a torpedo. His experience wasn't unique. By late 1943, many U-boats were returning from patrols without having attacked anything, driven under every time they tried to maneuver for position. The patrols accomplished nothing except exposing crews to trauma and boats to damage. The entire strategic concept had collapsed. The technological counter-race continued through 1944. Germany developed the Type Vistufte U-boat, a revolutionary design with streamlined hulls, massive battery capacity, and snorkels as standard equipment. These boats could remain submerged for extended periods, running fast on electric motors, surfacing rarely. They would have been formidable weapons, largely immune to centimetric radar because they almost never surfaced. But production delays meant only 4 became operational before war's end, too late to affect anything. The Germans also developed crude centimetric radar of their own, years behind the Allies. Their systems were larger, less powerful, and less reliable than British equivalents. More importantly, they lacked the industrial capacity for mass production. A handful of U-boats received German centimetric radar in early 1945. These boats could detect patrol aircraft at ranges comparable to what the aircraft could detect them. But by then, it didn't matter. There was no fuel, no trained crews, no safe harbours. The war was over in all but name. The final irony came in May 1945 as Germany surrendered. Dönitz, briefly serving as Hitler's successor as head of state, ordered all U-boats to surface, signal their positions and surrender to Allied forces. Over 220 submarines complied. British patrol aircraft, equipped with the centimetric radar that had hunted these boats for 2 years, found them easily. The submarines that had once hidden in the ocean's vastness now sat motionless on the surface, black crosses painted on their conning towers, waiting for Allied ships to take them into captivity. The ocean no longer hid them, but then it hadn't hidden them for quite some time. The technological victory represented by centimetric radar went beyond its direct impact on U-boats. It demonstrated that wars could be won through scientific advancement as decisively as through military action. The physicists working at MIT and British laboratories were as important as the sailors dropping depth charges. The cavity magnetron was as effective a weapon as any torpedo. This realization would shape the Cold War, as both superpowers invested massively in research and development, understanding that technological surprise could be decisive. For the U-boat service, the story ended in statistics. 784 U-boats were destroyed during the war. 28,000 crew died. They sank 2,279 Allied merchant ships, totaling 14.1 million tons, along with 175 Allied warships. But in exchange, Germany lost 75% of deployed U-boat crew and eventually lost control of the Atlantic completely. The cost-benefit analysis, viewed coldly, showed the campaign was a strategic failure. The shipping sunk was replaced. The U-boats were not. Historians debate whether earlier deployment of centimetric radar could have shortened the war. The technology became operational in early 1943. Had it arrived 6 months earlier, the losses in the winter of 1942-43 might have been prevented. Had it arrived a year earlier, the tonnage war might never have favoured Germany. But historical contingency cuts both ways. Had the Germans recognised the threat sooner and developed effective countermeasures, the outcome might have differed. Had they pursued the Type Dalsimian U-boat program earlier, creating submarines designed for submerged operations rather than surface raiders that dived when threatened, they might have maintained effectiveness longer. What's certain is that centimetric radar, this offspring of pure physics research, changed naval warfare forever. The ocean's concealment, which had protected submarines since their invention, was revealed as an illusion dependent on the limitations of human eyesight. Once technology could see beyond those limitations, submarines lost their primary advantage. Modern submarines compensate by operating deeper, moving silently using countermeasures. But the fundamental change happened in 1943 when electromagnetic radiation at 10 centimetre wavelength proved that invisibility was a function of available technology, not an inherent property of the ocean itself. At the Submarine Memorial in Miltenort, Germany, overlooking Kiel Bay, 30,000 names are inscribed. U-boat crew who never returned. Veterans gather there annually, fewer each year as time takes the survivors. Among them, occasionally, are former Allied personnel, the hunters who dropped the depth charges and fired the rockets. They share drinks, exchange stories, acknowledge the shared horror of it all. In these meetings, the Germans sometimes ask about the radar, seeking technical details about the weapon that killed so many of their comrades. The British and Americans, now old men describing events from their youth, explain the physics: 10-centimetre wavelength, cavity magnetron, rotating antenna, target discrimination, all the details that made hiding impossible, and inevitably, someone asks the question: if you had known what we know now, would you have done things differently? The answer is always the same. We did what we were ordered to do with the tools we had. You did the same. The radar just happened to be a better tool. The ocean didn't hide you anymore, and that made all the difference. The war was lost when physics solved a problem warfare couldn't. When invisible light illuminated the invisible hunters. When Heinrich Müller and 28,000 men like him discovered that the ocean's vastness was no protection against electromagnetic radiation, systematically sweeping the sea. The Battle of the Atlantic ended not in a climactic engagement, but in a technological revelation. The hunters became the hunted, and the sky filled with machines that could see in the dark. The thunder of explosions replaced the silence of stalking, and the ocean, which had hidden submarines since 1914, became transparent to those who knew which frequencies to transmit. The U-boats that survived limped home, their crews traumatized, their mission impossible, and centimetric radar, born from physics equations scratched on a blackboard in Birmingham, proved that sometimes the most devastating weapons are the ones that simply make the enemy visible. They laughed at us once, called us blind, said we'd never find them in the Atlantic's vastness. They were right, until we weren't. Until science gave us eyes that could see through darkness and weather, and the ocean's protective emptiness. Then the laughter stopped, and the dying began, and the ocean gave up its secrets to 10 centimetres of electromagnetic radiation. That's how the Battle of the Atlantic was won. Not with more ships or better tactics, but with physics. Cold, mathematical, merciless physics. The human cost of this technological transformation reveals itself most clearly in the personal accounts of commanders who watched their boats and crews destroyed by an enemy they couldn't understand. Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke, commanding U-515, was among Germany's most successful aces, with 25 ships sunk totaling over 120,000 tons. His patrol reports from early 1943 read like adventure stories: surfaced attacks executed with precision, convoys scattered, escorts evaded. By October 1943, his reports had transformed into desperate chronicles of survival. October 12th, patrol log entry. Detected convoy SC-143 at dawn. Began surface approach from northwest. After 35 minutes running at maximum speed, Naxos receiver activated. No visual contact with aircraft. Crash dived immediately. Remained submerged 4 hours. Batteries at 60%. Surfaced to continue pursuit. After 20 minutes, Naxos warning again. Dived. This pattern continued through the day. 7 separate warnings. 7 crash dives. Never saw an aircraft. Never came within torpedo range of convoy. Batteries now critical. Must surface for extended charge tonight regardless of risk. That night, U-515 surfaced in complete darkness. No moon. Heavy overcast. Visibility under half a mile. Henke believed the weather would protect him. He was wrong. A Canadian Liberator equipped with ASV Mark III radar detected the U-boat from 11 miles away. The aircraft commander, Flight Lieutenant Douglas Turner, later described the attack in his operational report. Radar contact bearing 047, range 11 miles, altered course to intercept. Target stationary, probably charging batteries. Descended to 200 feet, reduced speed for attack run. At 2 miles, activated landing lights. Target clearly visible, conning tower watch just beginning to react. Release 6 depth charges from 50 feet altitude. All charges straddled target. Massive explosion observed. Debris thrown 100 feet into air. Circled attack point for 30 minutes. Large oil slick floating debris. No survivors observed. U-515 didn't sink that night. By another miracle, the pressure hull survived, but 8 men died in the conning tower, blown into the sea by the explosions. The boat limped back to Lorient with its captain's confidence shattered. Henke's next patrol lasted 6 days before he aborted, unable to function under the constant radar surveillance. His final patrol in April 1944 ended when his boat was detected by a hunter-killer group south of Madeira. U-515 was sunk by the destroyer USS Chatelaine. Henke survived, was captured, and died in a prison camp escape attempt months later. His last letter to his wife, written from captivity, spoke of the radar. "We became ghosts, haunting an ocean that offered no sanctuary. Every moment on the surface was borrowed time. The Americans could see us, always see us, and we were blind to them until the bombs fell. No warrior should die that way, helpless against an enemy he cannot perceive." The psychological research conducted on captured U-boat crews revealed the devastating mental impact of radar-directed attacks. American medical officers at interrogation facilities documented symptoms consistent with severe anxiety disorders. Survivors described hypervigilance, inability to sleep, panic attacks triggered by aircraft sounds, recurring nightmares of explosions appearing from nowhere. One young petty officer from U-618, sunk in August 1943, required sedation during his interrogation because the sound of a truck backfiring outside the building caused him to collapse. Dr. Maurice Papworth, a British psychiatrist working with captured submariners, wrote in his classified 1944 report, "These men exhibit trauma beyond what we observe in other combat veterans. Infantry soldiers can see their enemy, take cover, fight back. These submariners describe attacks that provided no warning, no chance for defensive action, no ability to fight. The radar made them utterly passive victims. They surfaced knowing aircraft might already be tracking them, unable to determine if they were under observation, forced to wait for death that might or might not arrive. This combination of certainty and uncertainty, inevitability and randomness, destroys psychological resilience. Many express relief at being captured, grateful the waiting is over." The winter of 1943-44 brought no relief. If anything, Allied air patrols intensified as more aircraft received centimetric radar. The Bay of Biscay, which U-boats had to cross between their French bases and the Atlantic hunting grounds, became known as the Valley of Death. Coastal Command maintained continuous patrols, aircraft stacked at different altitudes, radar sweeping constantly. U-boats attempting the transit submerged discovered that even snorkeling left detectable signatures. The exhaust created a thermal signature visible to infrared equipment being tested on some aircraft. The wake could be spotted visually in calm seas, and any full surfacing for maintenance or navigation brought immediate attack. Oberleutnant Gustav Adolf Janssen, commanding U-103, attempted the Biscay transit in December 1943 using a new tactic. His boat would remain completely submerged for the entire crossing, using dead reckoning navigation, surfacing only after reaching deep water 200 miles west of France. The crew sealed themselves inside the pressure hull for 7 days. The air grew foul, thick with carbon dioxide. Men vomited from the stench. The batteries required careful management, limiting speed to 3 knots, barely making headway against currents. On the 6th day, the gyrocompass failed, leaving them navigationally blind. Janssen had no choice. He surfaced to take a star sight and determine their position. They were on the surface for 11 minutes. A British Sunderland flying boat detected them from 9 miles away. The aircraft attacked before U-103 could dive. Rockets struck the conning tower, machine gun fire raked the hull, depth charges exploded alongside. The boat survived but with catastrophic damage. The pressure hull was cracked, water flooding into the control room. Janssen ordered abandon ship. 34 men escaped, before U-103 slipped beneath the waves. The Sunderland circled, directing a rescue vessel to the survivors. Janssen, pulled from the water hours later, told his rescuers, "You can survive anything except what you cannot see. Your radar is not a weapon, it is judgment, absolute and inescapable." The statistics from Biscay transit losses tell the story numerically. In 1942, before centimetric radar, 5 U-boats were lost crossing the bay, roughly 2% of transits. In 1943, 56 boats were lost in Biscay waters, nearly 15% of transits. By 1944, the loss rate approached 25%. Dönitz ordered U-boats to transit entirely submerged, accepting the severe operational limitations. Even that wasn't enough. The Allies deployed magnetic anomaly detectors, sonar buoys, and improved hydrophones. Technology was hunting submarines with multiple overlapping systems, each covering the gaps in others. The Allied advantage extended beyond detection. Centimetric radar enabled an entire tactical revolution in anti-submarine warfare. Before the new radar, attacking a surfaced U-boat at night was nearly impossible. The submarine was a small, low target in vast darkness. Aircraft had to spot it visually, which meant the U-boat usually saw the aircraft first and dived. Attack success rates at night were under 5% in 1942. With centimetric radar, aircraft could track the submarine continuously from first detection through attack, adjusting their approach based on real-time position data. The navigator would guide the pilot. Target bearing 010, range 3 miles, steady course. The pilot could set up a perfect attack geometry, approaching from astern where the U-boat's lookouts were least effective, arriving at optimal altitude and speed. By 1943, night attack success rates exceeded 40%. The Lee light, a powerful searchlight deployed on aircraft specifically for illuminating submarines detected by radar, completed the deadly combination. The aircraft would track the U-boat on radar until within a mile, then activate the searchlight, pinning the submarine in a 20 million candle power beam. The U-boat crew, dark-adapted eyes destroyed by the sudden illumination, were blinded. The conning tower watch couldn't see to man guns or con the boat. Below, the commander received only screamed warnings. Aircraft attacking, range unknown, can't see. By the time eyes adjusted, depth charges were already falling. Survivors described the Lee light as worse than the explosions. At least in darkness you maintain some agency, some ability to respond. The light removed even that, reducing you to a helpless target awaiting destruction. Korvettenkapitän Engelbert Endras, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, veteran of 10 patrols including service under legendary commander Gunther Prien, died to this combination on December 21, 1943. His boat U-567 was detected by radar while surfaced in the Denmark Strait. A British Wellington bomber tracked him for 8 minutes before attacking. At 600 yards, the Lee light activated. Endras, in the conning tower, was blinded. He never ordered crash dive. The depth charges killed him and 47 crew instantly. 4 survivors were pulled from the water by a destroyer the next morning. One of them, Maschinenmat Friedrich Weber, told interrogators, "The light was like God's judgment, everywhere at once, inescapable, revealing everything. We were insects pinned to a board, waiting for the killing blow. Herr Callot, the commander, just stood there, hand over his eyes, unable to see anything. Then the world exploded. I was thrown clear into the water. I watched our boat break apart and sink, all in that terrible light. I wish I had died with her. Some things should not be seen." The technological cat and mouse continued into 1944 with increasingly desperate German countermeasures. In January, U-boats began deploying Bold, a chemical device that released metallic particles creating false radar echoes. The idea was to confuse attacking aircraft with multiple targets. In practice, Bold rarely worked. The radar operators quickly learned to distinguish between genuine submarine returns and bold decoys based on movement patterns. A real submarine moved consistently in one direction. Bold bubbles drifted with the current, spreading and dissipating. More importantly, by the time a U-boat deployed Bold, it was already under attack. The false echoes might buy a few extra seconds, but seconds weren't enough when depth charges were already falling. Aphrodite was another attempted countermeasure, a balloon covered in radar-reflective material that U-boats could deploy while submerged. The balloon would float on the surface, providing a radar return while the submarine escaped in a different direction. Again, the theory was sound. The execution failed. The balloons were difficult to deploy, easily damaged by weather, and created radar signatures distinctly different from actual submarines. Allied aircraft encountering Aphrodite balloons would investigate, determine they were decoys, then expand their search pattern. The submarines that deployed them gained perhaps an hour before being reacquired, and in that hour they couldn't travel far enough submerged to escape the expanded search area. The most desperate measure was Thetis, a coating applied to conning towers using rubber and carbonyl iron that theoretically absorbed radar energy, reducing the echo strength. Laboratory tests showed promise, reducing radar return by 30%. Operational tests were disasters. The coating added weight, affecting trim. It degraded quickly in seawater, requiring constant maintenance. Most critically, even a 30% reduction in radar return only decreased detection range from 10 miles to 8 miles. The aircraft still found the submarine long before it could dive. U-480, the first boat deployed with Thetis coating in June 1944, survived one patrol through luck and then was sunk on its second. Patrol by an aircraft that detected it at 7 miles range, circled to optimal attack position and destroyed it with rockets. The coating made no tactical difference. By mid-1944, Dönitz was deploying increasingly young and inexperienced crews on what amounted to suicide missions. The training programs, which had once required 18 months to produce a qualified submariner, were compressed to 8 weeks. New commanders received boats with less than 3 months' experience. The results were predictable and tragic. U-233, commissioned in September 1943, deployed in July 1944 with a crew whose average age was 19. The commander, Lieutenant Hans Stein, was 22 years old with 0 combat patrols. The boat was detected leaving port by Allied intelligence through signals intercept. A hunter-killer group was vectored to intercept. U-233 was sunk 6 days into its first patrol. There were no survivors. Similar stories repeated across the service. Boats lost on first patrols, crew dead before learning their trade, commanders killed before developing the intuition that might have saved them. The technological superiority extended to weapons as well. Allied depth charges evolved throughout 1944 to exploit the vulnerabilities centimetric radar revealed. The standard depth charge in 1942 contained 300 pounds of TNT, set to detonate at depth between 50 and 500 feet. By 1944, new weapons included the Hedgehog, a forward-throwing mortar that fired 24 contact-fused projectiles in a pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike conventional depth charges that had to pass over the submarine before exploding, Hedgehogs detonated on contact. A submarine detected by radar and tracked by sonar had nowhere to hide. The attacking vessel could maintain sonar contact throughout the attack, firing Hedgehogs based on real-time position data. If the submarine tried to go deep, the projectiles would sink faster. If it stayed shallow, it remained vulnerable. The only escape was to not be detected in the first place, and centimetric radar made that impossible. The Fido acoustic homing torpedo, deployed by Allied aircraft from 1943 onward, was another technological nightmare for U-boat crews. Dropped near a detected submarine, the torpedo would home on the noise of the boat's propellers or machinery. A U-boat crash diving from an aircraft attack would make noise, cavitation from the propellers, machinery sounds as systems activated, water flowing past the hull. The Fido would track those sounds, steering itself toward the source. Oberleutnant Johann Mohr, commanding U-124, became one of the first victims in April 1943. Detected by radar, attacked by a Liberator, Mohr executed a textbook crash dive and went deep. The Fido torpedo, dropped during his dive, tracked him to 600 feet and detonated against the pressure hull. U-124 imploded. All 53 crew died instantly, crushed by water pressure flooding through the ruptured hull. The combination of centimetric radar for detection and Fido for attack created an inescapable trap. Surface and radar found you. Dive and the acoustic torpedo hunted you. The only safe depth was below the Fido's operating envelope, deeper than 1,000 feet. But Type 7 U-boats were only rated to 750 feet. Exceeding that risked catastrophic hull failure even without enemy action. Some commanders, faced with certain death from above, would take their boats below rated depth, gambling that the pressure hull would hold long enough to escape. Sometimes it worked, usually it didn't. U-boats would implode at 900 or 1,000 feet, crushed like tin cans under the enormous pressure. Either way, radar had forced them into a choice between immediate death and probable death. There were no good options. The Allied technological advantage was compounded by signals intelligence. Bletchley Park cryptanalysts had broken the German naval Enigma codes by 1943, allowing the Allies to read U-boat position reports, operational orders, and patrol instructions often within hours of transmission. When combined with high-frequency direction-finding equipment that could locate transmitting U-boats within 50 miles, the intelligence picture was devastating. Allied commanders knew where U-boats were operating, where they were ordered to patrol, when they would surface to transmit reports. aircraft equipped with centimetric radar could be vectored to intercept areas, establishing patrol patterns that covered predicted U-boat positions. The submarines were operating in a battlefield where the enemy knew their locations before they knew themselves. Kapitänleutnant Adalbert Schnee, commanding U-201, discovered this reality in March 1944. His orders, transmitted by headquarters, directed him to intercept convoy on 227 at a specific point south of Greenland. Unknown to Schnee, British intelligence had decrypted his orders within 3 hours of transmission. The convoy was rerouted 200 miles south. 6 aircraft equipped with centimetric radar were assigned to patrol the original intercept area. When U-201 arrived and surfaced to search for the convoy, the radar-equipped aircraft were already there, stacked at different altitudes, waiting. Schnee's boat was detected within minutes. The first attack came before his lookouts even saw the aircraft. U-201 survived through exceptional damage control and luck, but Schnee's patrol report revealed his dawning awareness. The enemy knows our plans. They are waiting for us. We sail into traps carefully prepared. This is not combat, it is execution. The final phase of the U-boat war, from autumn 1944 through May 1945, was characterized by German delusion and technological desperation. The Type 20 U-boat, commissioned in limited numbers, represented everything the submarine should have been from the beginning. Streamlined hulls for underwater speed, massive battery capacity for extended submerged operations, schnorkel systems for unlimited underwater cruising, and sophisticated sonar for attacking without surfacing. These boats could theoretically operate for weeks without surfacing, immune to centimetric radar because they never presented targets. But production problems, Allied bombing of manufacturing facilities, crew training shortages, and simple chaos as Germany collapsed meant only 4 Type 20s completed operational patrols. None sank any ships. The technology arrived too late. The last U-boat sunk by centimetric radar-directed attack was U-320, destroyed on April 6, 1945 in the North Sea by a British Coastal Command aircraft. The boat was detected while surfaced, attacked before it could dive, and destroyed with all hands. Among the dead was Oberleutnant Heinz Franke, aged 20, on his first command, first patrol. He had been at sea for 11 days. His crew averaged 18 years old. Most had never seen combat before that final moment when radar-guided bombs found their boat. The war would end 29 days later. Those 29 days cost another 47 U-boats, all detected and destroyed by technology the Germans could not counter. Young men dying in obsolete boats, sent to sea by commanders who knew the mission was hopeless, but continued anyway because surrender was politically impossible. The surrender in May 1945 brought the final accounting. Of 830 U-boats commissioned during the war, 731 were lost. The survival rate for U-boat crew was 25%, making it the most dangerous service in any military during World War II. The primary cause of loss from 1943 onward was air attack while surfaced, representing 52% of all U-boats destroyed. Centimetric radar, the invisible hunter, had killed over 400 submarines directly and contributed to hundreds of other sinkings by guiding surface ships to targets. The interrogations of surviving U-boat officers produced a library of tactical analyses, post-action reports, and personal testimonies. Running through them all was acknowledgement of technological defeat. Fregattenkapitän Erich Topp, third highest-scoring U-boat ace with 35 ships sunk, summarized it in his 1945 debriefing. "We lost when we could no longer hide. Everything we did, every tactic we developed, depended on the ocean concealing us until we chose to reveal ourselves. Your radar removed that concealment. After that, we were simply targets. No amount of courage or skill could overcome the fundamental disadvantage of being permanently visible to an enemy who could strike before we knew he was there. The war was decided by physics and engineering, not by warriors. We were made obsolete." The post-war analysis by both sides confirmed Topp's assessment. The German Naval Staff's final report, completed in October 1945, stated, "The introduction of Allied centimetric radar in early 1943 rendered traditional U-boat tactics obsolete. All subsequent operations were conducted under conditions of permanent enemy surveillance. Loss rates became unsustainable." Continuation of operations after May 1943 served political rather than military purposes, From a purely naval perspective, the U-boat campaign ended the moment the enemy acquired the capability to detect surface submarines in all weather conditions at ranges exceeding crash dive capability. The human legacy was grief measured in thousands of families destroyed. 28,000 mothers received telegrams. 28,000 families attended memorial services for men whose bodies would never be recovered, lost in the cold depths of the Atlantic, the Arctic, the Mediterranean. The U-boat memorial services, conducted quarterly in Kiel and Hamburg through the 1950s, were attended by thousands. Widows, parents, siblings, children who would never know their fathers. The casualty rate meant nearly every German coastal town had lost someone to the U-boats. Entire classes from naval academies were gone, wiped out in the slaughter of 1943 and 1944. The technological lessons learned from centimetric radar influenced all subsequent military development. The principle that detection capability determines tactical possibilities became fundamental to Cold War military thinking. Both American and Soviet naval forces invested massively in sensor technology, understanding that finding the enemy mattered more than weaponry. Modern submarines operate with the awareness that electromagnetic radiation, acoustic signatures, thermal emissions, and dozens of other phenomena can reveal their positions. The ocean no longer hides anything from a sufficiently advanced detection system. The U-boat commanders learned this in 1943. It remains true today, at reunions of Allied and German naval veterans, held regularly through the 1980s and 1990s as the survivors aged. The conversations inevitably returned to the radar. The Germans wanted to understand, needed to comprehend the weapon that had killed so many. The British and Americans, old men now, would explain again about cavity magnetrons and wavelengths and detection ranges, and always the Germans would ask the same question, slightly different words but the same meaning. If you had known how completely the radar would defeat us, would you have deployed differently given us some chance? The answer was always no. War is won by exploiting every advantage. The radar was an advantage so overwhelming that mercy would have been betrayal. We used it because we could, because it saved Allied lives, because it won the war. Your friends died so ours could live. That is simply how it was. The final historical judgment is numerical and irrefutable. In 1942, before centimetric radar, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships while losing 87 submarines. The exchange rate was 13.3 ships sunk per U-boat lost. In 1943, with centimetric radar deployed, U-boats sank 597 ships while losing 237 submarines. The exchange rate dropped to 2.5 ships per U-boat. In 1944, with radar ubiquitous, U-boats sank 205 ships while losing 242 submarines. The exchange rate had inverted to 0.85 ships per U-boat. The trend line from dominance to parity to destruction took 24 months, a technology invented in a physics laboratory, refined by engineers, deployed by pilots and radar operators, defeated the most successful submarine campaign in history. Not through superior tactics or better weapons, but by making invisible submarines visible. The ocean, which had hidden submarines for 30 years, became transparent in 1943, and 28,000 men died because electromagnetic radiation at 10 centimeter wavelength could be transmitted, reflected, and detected before a U-boat could dive deep enough to survive. That is how the Battle of the Atlantic ended, in radar pulses and depth charge explosions and young men drowning in cold darkness, trapped inside steel coffins that could no longer hide. The thunder of falling bombs replaced the silence of the hunter, and the ocean gave up its submarines to the light.